Did something go wrong? Nothing much, a small thing, my life, that's all.
I can think of no man to whom I'm more indebted.
Wait a minute. You can tell him yourself. Come out, it's all right.
Why, it's Carl!
I didn't do anything. They made me do it.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Mariko Ichikawa, who is a sustainable fashion designer living in New York City. And I want to thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here with you.
All right. So you specialize in repurposing traditional Japanese kimonos for modern day wear.
Yes.
Now, in terms of your background, you spent some 10 years as a buyer for luxury retailers such as, some of the big brands that I think that's in your bio, Bergdorf, Goodman, Barneys, and so forth. Mm-hmm. And you've also worked in New York City as well as in Dubai. So I'm curious to know what kinds of, behind the scene insight did you gain from that experience, and how did that then inform and shape the enterprise that you're currently undertaking?
Yeah. So, I was very lucky to work in luxury retail, and especially as a buyer for women's ready to wear. So I worked with really, top brands from Givenchy to Alaya, Dries Van Noten, and Marc Jacobs. It was a really great opportunity. And from working in that sphere for so long, not just in ready to wear, but also in bridal and evening wear, I really was able to understand the luxury customer and what they were looking for. And, what started, probably when I started my career in that area, the big brands were just starting to get to be kind of everywhere, to be a little bit more ubiquitous. And that's kind of what you see right now. Fifth Avenue or Madison Avenue in New York City looks the same as most, big malls in high-end zip codes around the US, right? You'll see the same brands. And, you can take that all the way out to the global level, like the malls in Dubai and the malls in Hong Kong. They're all pretty much carrying the same brands. So what we started to see, as the years went on, is a push for exclusive product, because, Balenciaga was at Bergdorf and was at Saks and was at, and had their own boutique down the road. You were charged as a buyer to create a unique assortment that would resonate, with your store customer. But ultimately, you have the same people are shopping London, New York, Paris, Madison Avenue, Bergdorf Goodman, Barneys, New York, so you kind of have to create something special and a reason for the customer to buy from you. And what started happening with the big brands was asking the buyers to or the buyers asking the brands, to create exclusive product that would only be carried at that one store or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. And of course, prior to that trend that you're talking about is, if that continue, you basically end up creating almost like a commodity even within the luxury category. So to have that exclusive, something that's been tailored for a particular curator. But more so, I think the other thing that kind of concerned me a little bit as I was listening is this notion of not really catering to the localization and the cultural aspect. The fact that the merchandise is universally the same throughout the world. That in itself is a bit of a concern, at least from my point of view, because any other product would have a contextualized localization aspect, whereas here it's the same commodity to an extent, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I wasn't explaining it. So the idea of the exclusives would be sort of the localization,
Right,
the regional localization. So, the exclusives that I was asking for from, an evening wear brand in Dubai were very different from exclusives we'd ask for from that same brand at Bergdorf Goodman. And I did do that. So I saw, so I guess, that's part of what, is an important part of a buyer's job. Obviously you want to tailor the assortment to your local market. But for me, and how that ended up informing me to my business, was I started understanding that, that there was this desire, the customer desire for special, one of a kind, something nobody else had. And it was very difficult as a buyer to offer customers that, from major brands, because the reason that, they can make money is they can cut, hundreds of units of something, and, you kind of need that sales volume in order to carry a traditional corporate business, right? Versus, what customers wanted, what they were asking for, which was something special, one of a kind, something that nobody else had. We used to keep track of which people bought which dresses or which thing, so that, they wouldn't be sold the same. Their friend group wouldn't be sold the same thing at some of our stores. So, there is this very real desire in luxury retail of, something special and unique.
Yep. Absolutely agreed. And just for clarity, I was referring to ex ante versus ex post, but let's move on with the rest of the interview. So that brings us to the segue of your brand, which is really around the traditional Japanese kimonos, but upcycled into kind of a one of a kind derivative products, whether it's coats, ropes, or whatnot. Can you tell us a little bit more about your brand and what you're trying to accomplish?
Yeah. So it was really something that came about by accident. I had always wanted to design, but I never really considered actually doing it. I went into the sort of business end of fashion, working and buying. And, when I got the opportunity to start my business, originally I thought that I would be doing evening wear. That's something that, I had a lot of buying experience in. It felt like a safe market, and people always have events, they always have weddings, except for right now. But so it felt like the kind of the safe place to get into in terms of luxury retail and fashion. But what ended up happening on a trip back to Japan in 2017, when I went to go look for fabrics, I was really struggling to find the right price value for what I wanted to do with fabrics sourced in Japan. And it just so happens that I went to a secondhand kimono shop, and I saw all of these, kimonos that had been worn, traditionally every day, and now were being kind of thrown away because most people were starting to wear Western clothing every day. And they're, the fabrications are so beautiful and really high quality. And I talk about it a little bit in my brand, but I have this feeling of motenai, right? Which is this, like, it's a shame that this is being thrown away, or this is being wasted, or, nobody's going to wear this beautiful garment anymore, just because the tides have changed. Meanwhile, there's all of these Western style kimonos that have come onto the market, in Western countries. And I thought, like, man, I have to do something. Is there a way that I can use this as my base fabric and kind of create something from it? Something, the whole definition of upcycling is that you take something and then you make it even higher value than it started at. So it's something that is discarded. You work with it creatively, and then you end up creating something that's worth even more than you started with. And that's really what I sought to do with the kimonos. I did, from my buying background, buying for brands like Dries Van Noten. I had an understanding, that there were customers out there that loved, print and embroidery, and, have an eclectic or like collector, sensibility to them. So I thought, maybe I can make something, and if it's beautiful enough, people will like it. People want to buy it. I knew there was something out there, so I thought, okay, let me just give it a shot. And I've been able to kind of create this sort of like model, which as far as I know, I don't know anybody else who really is doing something like this.
So just kind of summarize there a little bit is that, I think there's been a Western interpretation of kimonos that are, created from scratch, using the kind of traditional, let's call it fast fashion type of a model,
Yeah.
a corporate model that has a lot of kind of waste built into it. You have chosen to integrate your heritage as well as this kind of abundance around the quality of fabric that is coming from the used secondhand kimono market in Japan, as an example.
Yeah.
Being able to actually source it in a sustainable fashion and then upcycle and use it to create very interesting products. I'm curious, first and foremost, on the market signal, what kind of reaction have you seen from, buyers as well as people that have seen your work?
It's all been very positive. I would say I only started last year. I launched last year, and I'm in 5 locations, 5 boutiques right now. I have a web store that I sell through, and I do events. But yeah, the reception to the kimonos has been really strong. Mostly from Westerners who really kind of love the story. I actually haven't tried to expand outside of the US, so I don't really know, what the reception would be like in Asia, but I'm interested to see. I've heard from my friends who are buyers overseas that it could be a great opportunity for me. So far, so good.
Sounds very exciting. Now, right now, it's one thing where the operation is within a certain control to manage the different aspects of the value chain, so that you're really squeezing out, greenhouse emissions or waste and other potential negative externalities. But as there's momentum and potentially you could scale to a fairly large operation,
Mm-hmm.
how would you start to think through the overall kind of process, whether it's the material mix, whether it's the sustainable transport, the packaging, the retail operations, and then you get into even the returns and overproduction. How will you be able to learn from the deep experience that you've had in the corporate world,
Yeah.
and to bring some of the efficiencies and the sustainability into your business?
So, so when you bring this up, it's so funny. I'm like, all these light bulbs going off, because I realize now, a lot of what I saw as a buyer made an impact on me, especially from, the waste that I saw, and then the decisions that I've made starting my company. So there's a couple things since I just started my business. The positive about being so new and small is that I can start fresh, right? I don't have numbers to comp from last year because I'm building it new. And so, I am cognizant of building it green from the beginning, right? That means some things are going to be more expensive, but if I build it into the cost structure from the beginning, I'm not then later in a position of like, oh, this X, Y, and Z is eating at my margin because now I've got to upgrade to, sustainable energy or whatever, all those things. So that's something that's been really important to me from the beginning. I, sought out fab scrap for the recycling of all my materials. And since most of what I use is silk or wool, they're able to recycle the vast majority of what I use. We purchase carbon offsets. All of the energy, in my studio is renewable. So, there's that aspect of it. And what I realize, now that you bring it up, my experience as a buyer for major brands at big department stores, we bought with the expectation of not selling 100%, right? Because when you're growing a business and you're comping a business, at least comping it to last year, you have to have a certain amount of inventory in order to give yourself a shot of making those same sales from last year. So the expectation is that you're going to have extra inventory at the end of the season, because that would mean that you planned it right. Now, let's say you sold out, that's great, but then you don't know how much money you left on the table, right? So kind of seeing that every year, and then, talking to designers and seeing everything that goes into sampling, understanding from my experience, taking classes at FIT, everything that goes into the cutting of patterns, the marking, all of that. There's so much waste everywhere. And I think for a while it got really bad, especially when online retail became important and you had all of the department stores competing with, major online brands like Net-a-Porter, and customers kind of just starting to figure out how can they shop online. What we were seeing is like an 30% return rate, which for a high-end store is really high. And why was that happening? Because you had customers who were ordering 3 sizes to only keep 1. So, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal until you realize how much time those 3 sizes have been off the market for somebody. And essentially that just means that they don't get sold to somebody else. And not even necessarily full price markdown. We're not even talking about that. It's like the amount of time, the item has to sell. That's in a fashion business, right? So for me, understanding that and understanding the way that the business worked, I didn't necessarily want to create a fashion business. I think a lot of the waste in fashion comes from the fundamental concept of fashion, right? Which is every 3 to 6 months, we need to put out newness and customers need to buy that, right? And so what that ends up being is too much inventory. It's very and just too much work for kind of everybody, So when I went to create my business, I knew that I didn't want to create a fashion business. Now that's a catch-22 because fashion is growth, right? Newness means you sell more and you grow more. If you go into a business and you say you're going to be basics or you're going to be something that is classic, it starts to become harder and harder to grow once you sell once you sell somebody their classic blazer. When's the next time they're going to come back to you for that classic blazer? Maybe in 5 years, right? So you either have to continuously grow that market or you have to figure out a way to sell to the same people over and over again. And that's why fashion is so tempting in the luxury space, because, there's a finite number of people who have the kind of money to spend on really high-end fashion. You can create products that that other people can afford, or you can figure out a way to sell to the same people over and over again.
So that's those are some really great points and insights. So thank you for that. We are running out of time here. So how can people learn more about your kimonos and the work that you're doing?
Sure. So I have a website. It's marikoichikawa.com. And you can also see a few of my kimonos on season 5 of Queer Eye. If you are a Netflix watcher, Karamo Brown is wearing a few of mine in a bunch of episodes of the new season. So if you're interested.
So with that, I've been joined by Mariko Ichikawa, who is a sustainable fashion designer. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.